Hi friends, it's Lisa. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're creating these 2 pages in my art journal and they're really fun. I forgot to film the very beginning, but that is all I did there is picked out 4 colors of the Diane Wakely gloss spray and just sprayed them down. It took a full 10 seconds. You just have to shake them and spray them. Now, I apologize for not showing that. I will definitely be using those plenty of times in the future, so just stick around and I'll show how to actually use those. But basically just sprayed them down and let them dry. They dried really quickly. Then I'm taking some Jane Davenport paint pens, and the pack comes with 4 pens, 2 big ones and 2 small ones. This I'm showing you is the small black one. I really like the bigger markers. I didn't really enjoy the smaller markers. The paint, I believe, is the exact same in both of them. The nib is different. And you can see here that the nib size doesn't really matter. You still get the same size marking. So it's kind of interesting that they give you 4 because they're like the exact same. I liked the nib in the bigger marker better. I felt like it flowed a lot easier. It just looked better all around. So that's what I'm using here. I'm taking the white pen and drawing through the stencil, and that's what I'm going to do for the next couple minutes. Is I'm just drawing through the stencil, and I'm not trying to make everything perfect at this point because I'm going to go back and do at least one more layer on top. In a few places I added a third layer. So you'll also see I don't try and get all those details after the first 10 seconds. I realize it's just not worth it. One thing I will note when drawing through the stencil, if you put too much paint through there, you're going to get some areas like that where too much paint and it seeps under. If you wait until it has dried, you're going to get splotches. So just try and use minimal paint when going through the stencil, and then you can add quite a bit more paint as you add it on. And you'll see when I'm doing the second layer, a lot of times I'm kind of stippling that on to try and get more paint because I want it to be very opaque. I picked the part of the background I really liked so that I could kind of highlight that through the window. Now I'm going through, and there are bridges in the stencil so that the stencil all holds together and doesn't fall, have random pieces falling out. So I'm going through and actually connecting those bridges in the end design so that it looks nice. Then once I finish coloring that all in, I'm going to move on to the next part, which is this overarch, and color that in. You'll see it is not at all opaque on just this first coat, but when I go back, I'll add a second coat and it will be opaque. So then adding the side, when I filmed this, I filmed it on the time lapse, so it's going really quick. And I'm just adding in details all around. Now, I will go through, and right here, in between that last shot and this one, you can see I added some black lines around the edges. I felt like it needed a little bit more contrast. After I did that, I think it was a mistake. Of course. But the thing about mistakes is you're going to make them. And so just keep going, and there's probably a way you can fix it. Which is what I'll do later on in this video. If I went back and did it again, I wouldn't add the black lines, but there's nothing you can do at this point. So I'm going to go through, I'm adding in the bricks. As part of the stencil, there's a little cutout of bricks. I've taken that, flipped it over, rotated it, basically to get different areas of bricks. You can also go ahead and just add in bricks like I'm doing there. I went over everything at least once to get it more opaque. Now, at this point, everything on this page is plastic, so I might not have actually needed to do this, but I went ahead and sealed it in. Now, remember that this is plastic at this point. The original paper is, of course, paper, and so it's porous, but adding that first layer of gloss spray basically coated everything so that it's not porous anymore, and adding more paint on there just made it even less porous. So at this point, adding that coat of the Distress Mixed Media gel, or whatever it's called, doesn't do a whole lot. I just wanted to make sure that it was coated. So I'm doing one of my favorite techniques where I'm taking the pit pens and just smushing them on, and then I use my finger and smush them around to give it some texture. I'm going to do this over all of the white areas. One thing you'll notice, sometimes I go out of the line. When it's still wet, I can easily just pick that up with my finger or a wet paintbrush, clean it off. You might ask why I would want to clean it off, and the answer is so I make sure that background comes through bright and happy, which is kind of what I'm going for. I've covered most of it, but I want what's there to still be bright. Kind of like an underpainting, I guess. So I'm going to go through, add that light gray color to everything. One thing to note, that it dries firm. So as soon as it's dry, if I add more color over top, I'm going to be able to mix that color around, but it's not going to interact with the dried layer underneath. So if I felt like this wasn't enough color, I could have gone through and added a whole nother layer. I ended up liking it. I do go back here and add in some low lights, some shadows. So you'll see I'm doing that with a darker gray marker, adding that in. If you add marker when it's wet, the colors will mix. You'll kind of pick it up. If you add it on top, you're just adding another layer of translucent color. So I'm going to go through and add that everywhere. And it gives a lot more dimension to those bricks. I'm going to be honest with you. This side, this page took a whole lot longer than the other page. So just don't worry. You can take a long time with our journal pages. You can take a really short time. It's just about having fun. So I'm adding some white pit pen over the black because I felt like the black was so stark. Really positive thing for the pens. Like I said, I really liked the thick pens. The white after 2 coats is very opaque. The black after 1 or 2 coats is really opaque. But just for this, the black was a little bit too black. So I'm going through and adding some more white to this because I'm going to add some vines. I'm going to show you what I did, how I colored them the first time. I messed it up, and that's on me, but I thought they looked much better the first time, so that's why I've included it. I'll also show you what I did wrong and how I fixed it. So here you can see it's a little hard to see in this video. In real life, it was easier to see where the leaves were, But I'm just going through and adding that second layer. Here's where you can see the stippling that I was talking about. I'm not sure if I showed any of the second layer earlier, but it's basically adding stippling, making sure that there's a pretty good flow of white coming out. Once that's dry, I'm going to take these scribble sticks, and I just hold the scribble stick in one hand, paint on it with the other. I usually use a brush, a water brush, and just pick up that color. I find that to be the easiest way to use these. Anytime I actually try and scribble it down on the page, it doesn't do much. So I would equate these to maybe gouache, like dried gouache. So that's kind of, I really like these scribble sticks. I even have the Caran d'Ache Neo Color 2 crayons, which are very similar to this. I actually prefer the scribble sticks. But anyway, so I did a full first coat. Now I'm going through and adding the darker layers. So first I'll just go ahead, pick up the color, and then drop it in the areas that I want. Once I've kind of used up a lot of that color, I'll go back through and use my brush to blend it between the lighter and the darker. It's really simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of artistic skill. You can see the end result of both of these pages look really like I knew what I was doing, but using the stencil and just some basic skills anybody can do, it looks pretty impressive. So here is where I start making my mistake. I'm thinking, okay, what I typically do is just put this glaze over top, and then it basically stops anything from moving. The issue I think I had here is that it's basically plastic, so that micro glaze isn't getting into the porous portions and stopping movement, because there is no porous sections. So I really should have used a spray fixative, or a fixative that doesn't include water. But we've moved on to the other page, and you can see I've just taken a dauber and with a foam applicator tip. This is a new foam applicator tip. You can't really, if you use this every day, you might be able to keep it for a while. I don't use it every day, so I typically just use a new one each time, but I have a ton of them, so it's not a terribly big deal. I also didn't put too much paint on this because you really don't need it. And I daubed away the extra. I can always go back and pick that up, but you don't want to have too much. So I'm going through, I'm trying to highlight some really cool areas where the color has mixed and it looks really cool, so that I can create a galaxy scene. You can see it really doesn't take that much paint, and it's really easy. I'm just mixing that around. I will dry that, and you see I'm moving, even though this is at twice the regular speed, I am moving that heat tool really quickly because I don't want any bubbling of the paint. I just want it to dry. After I've done the first coat, I'm coming back in and adding a little bit more black paint to the concentrated areas of black so that it becomes deeper, basically giving it some more depth. So I've tried to cover a good portion of it, but leave some of the really cool areas out, and I'll let that dry, which also takes no time at all because it really wasn't that much paint. Then I'm going to take some of this silver glitter dust, spray it all over the background. I'm pretty generous here. You're going to want to do this in a well-ventilated area or outside is typically what I do. Then once I give that a few minutes to dry, I'm going to take the iridescent glitter dust and add it into a few select areas. I'm not as generous with this one because I want to give it a little bit more depth and dimension. Then I'm taking some white acrylic paint, and I'm mixing it with some water so it's a little bit more fluid. And then here I try and be real fancy, like all these fancy YouTube stars, and like just spritz it with my brush. And I make a big mess. So I pull out the Tim Holtz splatter paint thing, splatter brush, which is basically just long plastic needly things all put together, and then you just pick up some of that white and pull the needles apart, and it splatters that white everywhere, and you get a really consistent, nice looking splatter. If you're like me and cannot splatter in a nice way to save your life, just get the splatter brush. It's worth the like $5 to $7. And don't try and be cool and fancy, because it never works. Anyway, I'm going to move on, and I'm stamping down the words I'm going to put on my art journal page. I find I like to have words on my art journal page. If you are not a word person, you don't have to put words. You could do whatever feels right to you. I personally like words, and right now I'm doing art journal of the 145th Psalm. I basically embossed that, which I showed you each of the steps. I use embossing all the time, so just check out one of my other videos. I'll talk you through how to emboss stamped images because it's one of my all-time favorite techniques, but I just chattered through that, so we're going to move past. I've embossed it with white embossing powder. I'm going over the top with some distress ink. For the left-hand page, what I've done is I'm using weathered wood, and I'll come back with some black soot, and I'm using the just regular distress ink, not the distress oxide, and I'm using it with my blender brush to just add some in there. And I'm also trying to do a like variety of color, not trying to make it perfect. You can also see that that E on praise is upside down. That was an accident, but I figured, hey, not everything's going to be perfect all the time. I'm just going to move. I'm going to go with it. I've been enjoying not trying to be as perfect and just having more fun with crafting, because sometimes I feel like I try and make everything perfect, and it really upsets me when something goes wrong, and I just want to have fun and enjoy doing what I enjoy. So that's kind of the reason why I left that in, because it's fine. It doesn't matter that much. So I'm adding the black soot over the top and just in some spaces to get some variation. Here I've cut down them into strips. I'll even trim them up further. I really should have at this point put the sealant, the microglaze sealant over the top before I cut them down anymore, but I didn't think about it until this point, so I did the microglaze at this point. These are on top of paper, so the sealant is going to actually do something, which is good. Here we go. Then I'm going to stick it down. I would suggest at this point, since you're gluing paper to plastic, that you use a wet glue and not a dry glue. I love dry glues, don't get me wrong. I typically use more wet glue, and that's because it's cheaper. But I really am a big fan of dry glue. There's just some situations where the wet glue is better. In general, wet glue is stronger. The dry glue has a lot of positives. It's a lot easier to use, a lot cleaner, but it isn't quite as strong when you're gluing something to a non-porous surface. So in this case, I would suggest going ahead and pulling out your wet glue and just using that. Next, I'm adding on the collage medium, and which is basically wet glue, but I'm putting it all over the back to seal it in. And this is where I make my mistake. Here you can see the collage medium is a water-based product. So when it comes into contact with water-based media, it's gonna interact. And that's what it did with that green vines. So here I thought I was at the very end of this project, and of course I mess it up. So I kind of pull away all of the collage medium that was green, finished sealing everything else, and then I'm going back with my Pitt pens and just coloring it the kind of the same way I did with those stones as well, but I will add some low lights. So that's what you're really seeing me do here. I think that the scribble sticks looked a lot better, and if I had sealed it in a way that actually sealed the scribble sticks, it would have been really nice. But the Pitt pens looked fine too. Here are some end photos. I think it turned out really cool. I love this galaxy. This was the easiest and best looking galaxy I've ever created, and it took no time at all. So definitely be using that trick again. Here I'm just showing you some close-ups. I hope you enjoyed all of this amazingness. I had a lot of fun creating it. Sorry I've been away. I haven't been making videos. This whole COVID craziness has kind of impacted my life, blah, blah, blah. But I'm back to making videos once a week. So if you haven't subscribed, definitely do that. Here are some other videos you might be interested in. I hope you guys have an amazing, wonderful day and get to spend some crafty time doing something awesome. See you guys soon. Bye.